The seat beside me had been empty for almost an hour, but I had never intended for anyone to sit there. I had placed my coat over it the moment I entered the wedding hall, not because I wanted to save a seat for a friend, but because I needed one small piece of the room to remain untouched. Across the aisle, beneath a wall of white roses and golden lights, my ex-girlfriend was about to marry someone else. And then, just minutes before the ceremony began, a stranger stopped beside my row, looked at the empty chair, and quietly asked, "Is this seat taken?" I looked at the chair, then at her, and heard myself say, "I saved it for you." I had no idea that those 5 words would change the course of my life. Before we continue, if you believe that kindness can arrive when we least expect it, and that people sometimes deserve a second chance at happiness, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Stories like this remind us that even after heartbreak, life can still surprise us in beautiful ways. My name is Daniel, and 6 months earlier, I had been completely certain that I would never attend my ex-girlfriend's wedding. Her name was Emily. We had spent 5 years together, 5 ordinary and extraordinary years filled with cheap dinners, long drives, inside jokes, arguments over nothing, and plans for a small house with a blue front door. We weren't perfect, but I had believed we were permanent. Then one winter evening, Emily told me she had met someone else. There was no dramatic betrayal, no screaming match, no broken plates. Somehow, that made it hurt even more. She simply looked at me with tears in her eyes and admitted that she no longer felt the same way. Her new relationship had begun quietly, and by the time I understood what was happening, she had already made her decision. I spent weeks pretending I was fine. I went to work, answered emails, smiled when people asked how I was doing, and returned home to an apartment that suddenly felt twice as large. Every object seemed to carry a memory. Her favorite mug remained in the kitchen because I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. A photograph from our first vacation stayed inside a drawer. Even the old blanket on the couch reminded me of the nights when we'd watched movies until 2 in the morning. I didn't hate Emily. That was the hardest part. If she had betrayed me, perhaps anger would have been easier than grief. Instead, I only missed the person she used to be, and I missed the person I had been when I believed we would grow old together. When the wedding invitation arrived, I almost threw it away. I stared at the envelope for several minutes before opening it. Emily's handwriting was still familiar. She had written my name carefully, as though inviting me to her wedding was the most normal thing in the world. I told myself I didn't have to go. No one would blame me. But after a sleepless night, I decided I would attend. Not because I wanted her back. Not because I wanted to ruin her happiness. I went because I wanted to prove to myself that I could see her move forward without falling apart. The wedding was held at an old countryside estate surrounded by tall trees and gardens covered in late summer flowers. Everything looked beautiful. Too beautiful. White roses lined the aisle, small candles flickered along the tables, and soft music floated through the enormous hall. Guests laughed and took photographs. Couples held hands. Families hugged. And I sat alone near the middle of the room, trying not to look toward the entrance. I had chosen a seat with an empty chair beside me. I told myself it was simply because I didn't want anyone sitting there. When a relative asked whether the chair was free, I shook my head and placed my coat over it. It was a ridiculous thing to do, but I needed somewhere to hide. The empty chair felt safer than another person asking me whether I was okay. Then the doors opened. Emily walked in wearing a simple white dress, and for one painful second, the entire room disappeared. I remembered another version of her, years earlier, standing barefoot in my kitchen, laughing because she had burned breakfast. I remembered her asleep against my shoulder during a road trip. I remembered the night she told me she loved me for the first time. Those memories rushed through me so quickly that I almost stood up. But Emily wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the man waiting at the end of the aisle. And I realized that this was the moment I had been afraid of. She was moving forward. So I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile, but it was genuine enough. The ceremony began, and I focused on breathing. When the vows were exchanged, I lowered my eyes. When everyone applauded, I clapped too. I wanted Emily to have happiness, even if that happiness no longer included me. After the ceremony, guests moved into the reception hall. I remained seated for a few minutes, watching people gather around the newly married couple. Eventually, I walked toward a quiet corner and poured myself a glass of water. I was considering leaving when I heard footsteps behind me. A woman stood there. I had never seen her before. She looked around 30, perhaps a little younger, with dark hair tied loosely behind her shoulders and a soft expression that seemed completely out of place among the noisy celebration. She glanced toward the crowded tables, then toward the empty chair beside mine. She smiled and asked if the seat was taken. I looked at the chair. My coat was still there. For some reason, I removed it. Then I told her I had saved it for her. She laughed softly, clearly thinking I was joking. I told her that I wasn't. I had saved it because everyone else seemed to have someone beside them, and somehow I thought the empty chair deserved a person who didn't mind sitting beside a stranger. She sat down. Her name was Claire. We talked for almost an hour without discussing anything important. She worked as a school counselor in a small town nearby. She loved old bookstores, hated crowded elevators, and had come to the wedding because the bride was her cousin. I told her I worked in architectural design and had a terrible habit of drinking coffee long after it had gone cold. Eventually she asked me why I looked as though I was trying to be happy for someone while secretly breaking apart. I looked at her in surprise. She apologized immediately, but I told her she was right. So I told her the truth. I told her Emily was my ex. Claire didn't react with pity. She didn't tell me that I would find someone better. She didn't say that everything happened for a reason. She simply listened. And that was the first unexpected kindness of the night. As the evening continued, Claire and I talked about heartbreak, not in the dramatic way people usually talk about it, but honestly. She told me that her father had died 2 years earlier and that for months she had been angry at everyone who told her to move on. She said grief wasn't a door that closed behind you. It was a room you learned how to walk through without getting lost. I told her I was afraid I would never stop comparing everyone to Emily. Claire smiled and said perhaps I wasn't supposed to stop comparing. Perhaps I simply needed to stop looking backward. Those words stayed with me. Later, the DJ announced the first dance. Emily and her husband stepped onto the floor. Everyone gathered around them. Claire looked at me, expecting me to leave. But I stayed. I watched Emily laugh as her husband whispered something in her ear. She looked genuinely happy. For the first time, it didn't feel like I had lost her. It felt like I had finally accepted that she had never been mine to keep. That realization hurt, but strangely, it also brought peace. Then something unexpected happened. Emily approached me. She thanked me for coming. I told her she looked beautiful and that I hoped she would be happy. She looked at Claire, then back at me, and smiled. She told me she had been afraid I would hate her forever. I admitted that there had been days when I hated everything, but I never truly hated her. She hugged me. It wasn't the embrace of two people trying to get back together. It was the quiet hug of two people saying goodbye to a chapter they had once thought would never end. When she walked away, I realized I wasn't crying because I wanted her back. I was crying because I was finally letting her go. Claire didn't say anything. She simply handed me a napkin. I laughed through my tears. She told me that if I was going to cry at weddings, I should at least do it elegantly. For the first time that evening, I laughed without forcing it. The reception continued late into the night. Claire and I talked about everything and nothing. We discovered that we both loved rainy mornings. We both hated pineapple on pizza. She confessed that she had once gotten lost in a museum for 3 hours because she refused to ask for directions. I told her I had once driven 40 minutes in the wrong direction because I was too embarrassed to admit I had missed an exit. By midnight, the hall had begun to empty. Claire stood and told me she should leave. I looked at the chair where she had been sitting. It suddenly seemed impossible that only a few hours earlier, I had considered that chair a place to hide. Now it felt like the place where my life had quietly changed direction. Outside, the night air was cool. The estate lights reflected across the wet pavement, and distant music could still be heard from inside. Claire turned toward me and asked whether I would regret giving her my number. I smiled and told her I might regret not doing it. She gave me her phone. I entered my number. Then she looked at me and said something I would remember for years. She said that sometimes the person who sits beside you during your saddest moment doesn't become part of your past. Sometimes they become the reason you finally believe in the future again. We didn't kiss that night. We didn't promise anything. We simply said goodbye. But the next morning, I woke up to a message from Claire. She had sent me a photograph of an empty chair. Under it, she had written, "Looks like you saved the right seat." I smiled for the first time in months. Over the next few weeks, Claire and I started talking every day. Slowly, carefully, without rushing. We met for coffee. We walked through bookstores. We visited the park where she used to go with her father. She never tried to replace Emily, and I never asked her to. Instead, she helped me become someone who no longer needed replacing. Months later, I returned to the same wedding venue with Claire. Not for another wedding. We were there because the estate had opened a small winter market, and Claire wanted to see the old bookstore stalls. We walked through the reception hall. The chairs were empty. I stopped beside the one where Claire had first sat down. She looked at me and smiled. I told her that I had saved that seat for a stranger. She corrected me gently. She said I had saved it for someone I hadn't met yet. And she was right. Because sometimes life doesn't take something away from you to punish you. Sometimes it creates an empty space because something new is meant to fill it. If this story touched your heart, please don't just watch and scroll away. Like the video, share it with someone who may be healing from heartbreak, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Your support helps us continue sharing stories about kindness, second chances, and the unexpected moments that can change a person's life. And before the story ends, I have one special request for you. Comment, "I believe in second chances," if you believe that even after heartbreak, life can still give us something beautiful. Daniel never forgot Emily's wedding. Not because it was the day he lost the woman he once loved, but because it was the day he finally stopped holding on to what was already gone. And he never forgot the question Claire asked when she first approached him. "Is this seat taken?" Because sometimes the most important moments in life begin with an empty chair. Sometimes heartbreak makes us sit alone long enough to notice who is willing to sit beside us. And sometimes, without knowing it, we save a seat for someone who was always meant to find us. The chair had been empty when the evening began. But by the time Daniel walked away, it was no longer a symbol of loneliness. It had become a reminder that love doesn't always return in the same form we lost it. Sometimes it arrives quietly. Sometimes it arrives as a stranger. And sometimes, when we finally have the courage to let go of the past, we discover that the empty seat beside us was never empty at all.